The first sound I heard when I opened the dining room door wasn't a greeting. It wasn't even silence. It was laughter, sharp, careless laughter that carried across the table. I froze on the threshold, the smell of roast chicken and garlic butter filling the air, my hand tightening around the doorknob. They hadn't seen me yet, not properly. My brother had just finished some joke and my sister-in-law's shrill voice rang out. Oh, she probably forgot again, she never brings anything to the table. Have you ever been forgotten by the very people who were supposed to love you the most? This story will grip your heart from the first second. Don't look away. And then they all laughed. That laughter hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just about me walking in empty-handed. It was the weight of years behind that one sentence. Years of being the afterthought, the one they joked about when I wasn't in the room, the one they dismissed even when I stood right there. I didn't flinch. I didn't clear my throat or announce myself. Instead, I stepped inside, slow and measured, like I had all the time in the world. My heels clicked against the wood floor, and their laughter cut off as though someone had slapped them. I gave them a smile, thin, polite, the kind of smile you give a stranger you'll never see again. Don't stop on my account, I said, setting my purse on the empty chair. Go ahead. I'd love to hear the end of the joke. My brother coughed into his glass. My sister-in-law looked down at her plate, suddenly fascinated with her mashed potatoes. No one said a word. I sat down without waiting to be offered a seat. That was the first small rebellion. They never noticed, but I did. And tucked inside my purse, just under the folded napkin, was the second rebellion. My notebook. My secret. The one thing that had kept me steady through decades of their indifference. They didn't know about it and they never would. The clock on the wall ticked. 6:30 sharp. Outside, the winter wind rattled the windows. Inside, the room smelled of cinnamon rolls cooling on the counter, though none were set aside for me. I picked up the water glass in front of me, sipped slowly and watched them squirm. Anyway, my brother said finally, his voice too loud, we were just talking about, the weather. The weather. In January. As though snow in New England was something new. I let the silence stretch just long enough to sting. Interesting, I said. I didn't know the weather had such a good sense of humor. My nephew snorted into his plate. He was young enough to laugh without guilt, old enough to know exactly what was happening. His mother shot him a look that could have curdled milk. That little moment gave me fuel. Because here's the truth, I wasn't empty-handed. I carried memory. I carried the tally of every forgotten card, every unreturned call, every time they had turned me into the punchline of their small, mean jokes. They thought I was harmless. Invisible. Too soft to push back. That was their mistake. The conversation limped along after that, like a wounded animal dragging itself across the room. Someone commented on the food. Someone else mentioned the neighbor's new car. But under it all, the tension grew, the way a draft grows under a door you can't quite close. Halfway through dinner, my sister leaned across the table and gave me that look. The one that pretended kindness but carried a knife underneath. You didn't bring anything tonight, huh? She said lightly. No dessert? No little gift? There was. Figured. The repeat of the joke. This time with the dagger slipped in openly. I set my fork down. My hand didn't shake. I looked her straight in the eye. No, I said. Not tonight. Her smile faltered. Just a fraction. But I saw it. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had already given myself a gift earlier that day. Something none of them could take back, no matter how they mocked or dismissed me. That secret was mine, tucked safe in a place they'd never think to look. But I wasn't ready to reveal it. Not yet. Instead, I leaned back, folding my hands in my lap. Strange, isn't it? I said softly. How people can be so quick to notice what isn't brought, but so slow to notice what's missing. The words hung in the air. My nephew stopped chewing. My brother's hand froze halfway to his glass. My sister's smile hardened into a mask. For the first time all evening they were silent. Not the silence of comfort, but the silence of people who suddenly felt exposed. I let it sit. I let it sink. And then I smiled again, the same thin, polite smile as before. Pass the chicken, would you? I asked. My voice was calm, even pleasant. That was the moment the power shifted. They didn't realize it yet, but I did. Because in that silence, in that uneasy shifting of their eyes, I saw it clearly. They were guilty. They were ashamed. And they knew, even if they couldn't name it, that I wasn't the same woman they thought they could keep overlooking. Dinner continued, but the air never recovered. The clatter of forks on plates was too loud. The small talk was forced. And every time someone laughed, it ended too quickly, like they were afraid of their own echo. When dessert came, 2 pies, both untouched by my hands, I didn't move to serve myself. I just sat watching them, letting the tension thicken until it was almost unbearable. Finally, my brother cleared his throat. "You look different," he said carefully. "What's going on with you?" I lifted my glass, took another sip of water, and held his gaze over the rim. "Nothing you need to worry about," I said. And then I smiled, but this time the smile wasn't polite. It was sharp. Knowing. The kind of smile that said, "You'll find out soon enough." The clock struck 7. The cinnamon rolls had gone cold. And for the first time in years I felt warm. Because I knew something they didn't. And I wasn't going to let them forget it. Not ever again. I left that dinner without saying goodbye. The cold January air bit at my cheeks as I stepped outside. But inside I carried a warmth that their laughter could no longer touch. They thought I would go home, cry a little, and show up again the next time they needed me. They were wrong. That night I made a choice. Not a loud one. Not one they could point to and call dramatic. It was quieter than that, like blowing out a candle in an empty room. I chose silence. At first it was almost too easy. I stopped calling. I stopped answering. I didn't send the little reminders I always sent. About appointments, about birthdays, about bills coming due. I didn't drop off the soup when someone caught the flu. I didn't show up with a spare set of hands when they moved furniture. I pulled away one thread at a time, and the fabric of their comfort began to fray. But the strangest part? They didn't notice. Days slid into weeks and my phone stayed silent. Not one call. Not one message. I would sit at the small kitchen table in my house, the clock ticking steady on the wall, the tea steaming in my cup, and wait just to see if they would remember me on their own. They didn't. Instead, I began remembering for them. I pulled out the notebook I kept hidden at the back of the drawer. A plain brown thing with worn edges, nothing remarkable to the eye. But inside it carried years, decades, of their absence. Page after page I had written dates. My college graduation, where they promised to attend but never showed. The week I was in the hospital and only one distant cousin came to visit. The time I moved houses alone, lifting boxes heavier than I should have because everyone was too busy. Even my 50th birthday, the one where they said they would plan something special, then called me the next morning to apologize for forgetting. I didn't write these things down to wallow. I wrote them down so I wouldn't gaslight myself later, so I wouldn't let their excuses make me doubt my own memory. Looking at the notebook now, I saw it clearly. This wasn't neglect once or twice. This was a pattern. A story told in ink, and I was the only one who had been paying attention. I tapped the pen against the page and felt a strange calm spread through me. They thought I was weak. That silence would make me smaller. But silence, in my hands, was sharper than any word I could throw at them. On the 4th day I went grocery shopping and ran into my sister-in-law at the store. She was pushing a cart piled high with snacks for her son's basketball game. Her eyes widened when she saw me, as though I had stepped out of some shadow she forgot existed. "Well, if it isn't the mystery woman," she said, smiling too wide. "We haven't heard from you. Everything okay?" I nodded. "Everything's fine." "Good, good," she said quickly, glancing down at the crackers she was loading onto the belt. She didn't ask another question. Not about me, not about my life. She filled the silence with nervous chatter about her new curtains. Curtains. That was the moment I realized something. They only noticed me when I filled a role in their lives. When I cooked, when I carried, when I reminded, when I showed up. Without that, I was a ghost. And ghosts, I thought, can be terrifying if you let them linger long enough. I carried that thought home with me. The house was quiet but not empty. The silence had a texture now, thick, deliberate, humming with the knowledge that I was the one controlling it. At night I wrote again. I wrote not just what they had forgotten but how it had shaped me. I wrote about the ache of being invisible at your own family table, the sting of laughter used as a weapon, the exhaustion of always forgiving and always being overlooked again. The words filled the pages faster than I expected. And when I read them back, I didn't see weakness. I saw clarity. A week passed before anyone came to my door. It was my brother standing on the porch with his hands stuffed into his coat pockets. "You've been quiet," he said when I opened the door. "Yes," I said. "I have." He shifted from foot to foot. People are starting to wonder what's wrong. Are they? I asked. My voice was steady, my face calm. He nodded, avoiding my eyes. Mom thinks maybe you're upset about something. Maybe, I said softly. I let the pause stretch until he looked up, uncomfortable. Do you know what my birthday was? His mouth opened. Closed. He blinked. Well, I smiled. That's what I thought. And I closed the door gently. Not a slam. Not anger. Just finality. The silence after the latch clicked was almost beautiful. That night I added another entry to the notebook. January. They came, but only because they were worried about themselves. Not about me. I could feel it now, the shift. The silence was no longer something they could ignore. It had weight. It pressed against them in their kitchens, in their cars, at their tables. They had been comfortable for too long, leaning on me like a crutch. Now they had to stumble without it. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to beg. All I had to do was nothing. And my nothing was louder than their everything. My nothing was louder than their everything. I could feel it. And sure enough, the knock came the next evening. It was sharp, hurried, not polite, not patient. The kind of knock that says we're not asking, we're demanding. I didn't rush. I let them knock again before I wiped my hands on the dish towel, crossed the kitchen and opened the door. There they were. My brother, my sister, and my sister-in-law all huddled together on the porch. Their faces were pinched against the cold, but I knew it wasn't just the January wind that made them uncomfortable. You've been ignoring us, my sister said first, her voice clipped. We came to see what's going on. Ignoring. That was the word she chose. Not quiet, not distant, not even different. Ignoring. As though my absence was an offense against them, not the other way around. I leaned against the doorframe, folding my arms. Have I? Yes, my brother cut in. And frankly, it's getting childish. That almost made me laugh. Childish, as though years of forgetting me, of mocking me, of taking me for granted had been mature. But I didn't laugh. Kept my face calm. What exactly are you here for? To talk, my sister-in-law said, her smile stretched too thin. We just want to understand. Understand. I nearly asked her to repeat it. Because if they had wanted to understand, they would have asked me things years ago. They would have listened when I was sick, when I was struggling, when I was lonely. But no, they wanted to understand now, when my silence had finally made them uncomfortable. I didn't invite them in. I stayed planted in the doorway, letting the cold seep between us like a barrier. My brother cleared his throat. Look, Mom's been worried. She thinks maybe you're upset because of something. Something. I asked softly. Yes, he said, glancing at my sister. You know, something personal. My sister rolled her eyes. Oh, for heaven's sake, we all know what this is really about. It's because we didn't make a fuss over your birthday. Is that it? Her voice had that sneer, the same one she used when she thought she was smarter than everyone else. I tilted my head. What day was my birthday? Her mouth opened, then closed. She blinked, turned to my brother and said, Well, it was last week, wasn't it? I watched him fumble, his lips moving as though the date might magically appear if he searched hard enough. The silence that fell between us wasn't mine this time, it was theirs. Thick. Heavy. Embarrassed. I smiled. Not wide. Just enough. That's what I thought. I started to close the door, but my sister-in-law reached out, her hand catching the edge. Wait, she said quickly, her eyes darting. You can't just shut us out. We're family. Family. That word used to mean something to me. For years I had held on to it like a rope, even as it burned my hands. But now, it felt hollow. A sound people used when they wanted something from you. I'm tired, I said simply. Come back when you remember what being family really means. I pulled the door free from her grip and shut it. Not hard. Just final. Inside, the silence wrapped around me like a blanket. Safe. Protective. But I'll admit, my hands shook as I braced against the door. Not from fear. From something deeper. A strange mix of grief and power. Grief for the years I wasted waiting for them. Power in finally not needing to anymore. I turned and saw the notebook sitting open on the kitchen table. My pen lay across the page like it was waiting for me. So I wrote. January. They came. Not out of love. Out of discomfort. They wanted me to fix their guilt. I didn't. The words steadied me. But it didn't end there. The next day the calls started. One after another. First my brother. Then my sister. Then a string of texts from my sister-in-law. We were just joking, you know that. You're blowing this out of proportion. Come on, we've all been busy. Excuses. Thin ones. And none of them had my name in them. Not one said we're sorry we hurt you. Only you're making this difficult for us. I didn't answer. 3 days later they showed up again. This time I saw their car pulling into my driveway as I stood at the kitchen sink. The snow crunched under their boots as they marched up the walk. The knock rattled the glass. I didn't move right away. I let them stand there in the cold. I wanted them to feel it. The waiting, the uncertainty, the chill of being on the outside. When I finally opened the door, their faces were harder. Less guilt, more frustration. This has gone on long enough, my brother said, his jaw tight. You can't keep acting like this. Like what? I asked. Like we're the enemy, my sister snapped. We're your family. We've always been here for you. That was the moment I couldn't hold back the laugh. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp. Always been here? Tell me when. When I graduated and you didn't show up. When I was sick and you couldn't be bothered. When I moved and you never lifted a finger. Which time was it exactly? Their silence was answer enough. I leaned closer, lowering my voice. I've been keeping track, you know. They blinked. Confused. Nervous. What do you mean? My sister-in-law asked. I didn't answer. I just smiled. A smile that carried years of quiet, years of being ignored, years of remembering what they wanted me to forget. The silence stretched again, pressing down on all of us. Finally, my brother muttered, "You're not the same lately." "No," I said. "I'm not." I closed the door before they could speak again. This time I didn't shake. This time I felt steady. Thought. Like I had finally stepped into the truth I had been circling for years. And yet, as I sat back down at the table, notebook open, pen in hand, a question lingered in my mind. How far am I willing to take this? Because something told me the knocking wasn't over. And next time they wouldn't just come with words. They'd come with demands. Maybe even ultimatums. And I was ready for it. The next morning, the phone rang before the sun had fully risen. I didn't pick up. I let it buzz across the kitchen counter while I stirred my oatmeal. The sound was harsh, demanding, as though the caller had a right to my attention. I let it ring until the machine caught it. Their voices spilled into the room, muffled but clear enough. We're not the bad guys. She's making this harder than it needs to be. Fine. If she doesn't want to be part of the family, that's her choice. I ate my breakfast slowly, each spoonful warm against the chill in the air. Their words didn't sting like they once would have. Instead, they confirmed what I already knew. They didn't miss me. They missed what I did for them. By afternoon, the first test came. My sister-in-law knocked on the door with a smile painted on her face and a grocery list in her hand. "Since you're not busy," she began, "could you drive me to the store? The car's acting up again." I looked at the paper in her hand, at the neat little columns she'd written out like I was her personal delivery service. For years, I would have said yes without hesitation. For years, I would have dropped everything. But not now. "I can't," I said. Simple. Final. Her smile flickered. "Oh, come on. It's just a quick trip." "No," I repeated. The word felt like a stone dropping into a pond, small but sending ripples far beyond sight. She muttered something under her breath as she turned away, but I didn't ask what. I didn't need to. That night the phone rang again. This time it was my brother. His voice was sharper, clipped with irritation. "Why didn't you help her today?" he demanded. "Because I didn't want to," I said. There was silence on the line. A stunned pause. Then a laugh. Not the funny kind, the disbelieving kind. "You're serious?" "Yes," I said. "Well," he snapped, "don't come crying to us when you need something." "I won't," I answered. And I hung up. It was almost laughable how quickly the balance shifted. For years they had leaned on me like I was furniture. Steady, expected, unnoticed until it was gone. Now every refusal cracked their comfort a little more. The days that followed were a string of small tests. My sister called to see if I could babysit her son on Saturday. I said no. My brother asked if I could look over some bills since you're so good with numbers. I said no. My mother called to ask if I would bring over soup since she felt under the weather. I paused at that one. It was the hardest. But I said no. And each time I wrote it down. Not with cruelty. Not with spite. With clarity. January. Said no. They didn't understand. I wasn't punishing them with rage. I was teaching them the weight of forgetting, the emptiness it creates, the absence it leaves. The tension grew quickly. At the next family dinner I didn't attend, my cousin stopped by afterward to check on me. He shifted awkwardly in the living room, glancing at the notebook on the table though he didn't know what it was. "They're saying you're being difficult," he admitted. "That you're angry all the time." I smiled faintly. "Funny. I'm calmer than I've ever been." He studied me for a long moment before nodding. "You don't look angry. You look finished." That word stayed with me. Finished. Because that's what forgetting does, doesn't it? It finishes things quietly. It doesn't scream. It doesn't fight. It just erases until there's nothing left. A week later I saw the first crack in their armor. My sister showed up again, this time without her son, her face tight with frustration. "Look," she said, standing on my porch. "I don't know what you're trying to prove, but this isn't fair." "Fair?" I repeated. "Yes," she snapped. "You can't just withhold yourself like this. We need you." There was the truth slipping out before she could stop it. "We need you. Not we love you. Not we miss you. Not even we're sorry. Just we need you." I leaned against the doorframe, the cold air brushing my arms. "And when I needed you?" I asked quietly. Her lips parted, but no words came. She looked down, her hands twisting together, and for a brief second I saw it, the flicker of shame. But shame is a tricky thing. It doesn't last long before it curdles into anger. "You're making a mistake," she hissed, turning on her heel. I watched her walk away, her boots crunching in the snow. And for the first time I felt no urge to chase after her. The silence that followed was different now. Not just mine, but theirs too. They felt it pressing against them, heavy, undeniable. So they tested me. My brother called one night, his voice softer this time. "Mom's upset," he said. "She says you don't care about us anymore." I closed my eyes, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the faint tick of the clock. "That's not true," I said finally. "I care. I just don't carry." He didn't understand. He couldn't. But I knew he would feel it soon enough. Because with every no, with every closed door, I wasn't just pulling away. I was holding up a mirror. Showing them what forgetting feels like when the silence is deliberate, when the absence is chosen. And they didn't like what they saw. By the end of the month the calls grew fewer. Not because they accepted it, but because they didn't know what else to say. The weight of my silence was doing the talking for me. I sat at the kitchen table one night, the notebook open, and realized something that made my hands tremble. This wasn't just about them anymore. It was about me. About proving to myself that I didn't need their crumbs of attention, their half-hearted apologies, their empty words. For the first time in my life I felt free. And yet, in the back of my mind, a question lingered like a shadow. How long could this silence last before it broke into something else? Because forgetting, as powerful as it is never the end of the story. It was early March when the invitation arrived. A cream-colored envelope slipped under my door, the handwriting unmistakably my sister's. I stood in the hallway with it in my hand, tracing the loops of the letters with my thumb. Inside, a card: "Surprise gathering, for you. Saturday 6 p.m. Family only." For me. 2 words I hadn't seen in their handwriting in years. I should have felt warmth, gratitude, maybe even forgiveness. But instead all I felt was suspicion. Not because I didn't believe the gathering would happen, but because I knew exactly why it would. Not out of love. Out of fear. Fear of losing what I had stopped giving them. Fear of the silence that had grown louder than any words I'd ever spoken. So I went. Not because I needed them, but because I wanted them to see who I had become without them. The night of the gathering I dressed simply. A navy sweater, black slacks, my hair pulled back neatly. No jewelry, no perfume. Nothing to impress. I wanted my presence, not my appearance, to do the work. The house smelled of candles and roast beef when I arrived. Balloons floated in the corners, silver and gold, and a cake sat on the table. My name scrawled across the frosting in uneven letters. "Surprise!" they shouted as I stepped through the door. Their voices were too bright, too rehearsed. My sister clapped her hands together, her smile strained but wide. My brother gave me an awkward hug, patting my back as though I were a guest he barely knew. My sister-in-law handed me a plate of appetizers with trembling fingers. I stood in the center of the room looking at them, really looking. Their faces were nervous, hopeful, desperate. They wanted me to erase the past with one night of forced celebration. But the past was written in ink. "Thank you," I said, my voice even. "This is something." They laughed, relieved, mistaking my calm for surrender. Dinner passed in a blur of chatter. They spoke about neighbors, about vacations, about work. They tried to pull me into the conversation, but I answered only in short sentences, my eyes steady, my tone polite. It wasn't until the cake was brought out that the room shifted. Candles flickered in the dim light. My nephew, grinning, pushed the cake toward me. "Make a wish," he said. I stared at the flames. So small. So fragile. A single breath could erase them. And then I knew what I had to do. I didn't blow out the candles. I straightened in my chair, folded my hands on the table, and looked at each of them one by one. "This is the last birthday we'll ever spend together," I said. The room froze. Forks hovered midair. My sister's smile cracked, my brother's face paled, my sister-in-law's eyes widened. "What?" my sister whispered. "You heard me," I said. "This is it." "Don't be ridiculous," my brother snapped. "You can't just—" "Yes," I interrupted softly. "I can." I reached into my bag and pulled out the notebook. The brown cover looked ordinary, but the way they stared at it, you would think I had placed a weapon on the table. "I've kept track," I said, my voice calm. "Every forgotten birthday. Every broken promise. Every moment you turned me into a joke or an afterthought." I flipped the pages, letting the sound fill the silence. Graduation. Hospital. Moving day. Year after year. Line after line. And do you know what's the saddest part? You don't even remember the forgetting. But I do. My sister-in-law shook her head. "That's not fair." "No," I said sharply, my voice cutting through hers. "What wasn't fair was expecting me to carry the weight of being family while you treated me like a placeholder." The candles still flickered. My nephew looked at me, his young face caught between confusion and awe. I turned to him. My voice softened. "This is what forgetting does. It erases people until they're gone." Then I blew out the candles. One long breath. The flames vanished. Smoke curled into the air, bitter and sweet. The silence that followed was absolute. I stood, tucking the notebook back into my bag. My chair scraped against the floor. "I don't need this cake. I don't need your surprise. I don't need your apologies. I came tonight so you could see what it looks like when someone finally stops waiting to matter." My brother opened his mouth, but no words came. My sister's hands trembled against the table. My sister-in-law looked away, her cheeks flushed with shame. I walked to the door. My steps were steady. My heart was calm. At the threshold I paused and turned back. My birthday came back to me this year. Not because you remembered. Because I remembered myself. And with that I left. Outside the night was cold but clear. Stars glittered above like tiny witnesses, and the air smelled of pine and smoke. My car waited at the curb, silent, dependable, mine. As I slid into the driver's seat I felt a weight lift. Not just the weight of their neglect, but the weight of my own waiting. I had given them years of chances, years of forgiveness, years of myself. Tonight I gave myself something different. Closure. I turned the key, the engine humming to life, and for the first time in decades I felt free. Truly free. Because revenge doesn't always come in shouting or slamming doors. Sometimes, revenge is walking away with your head high, leaving them to choke on the silence they once gave you. And that silence, my silence, will be the loudest thing they ever remember. They forgot my birthday, but I will never forget the day I finally gave myself back to me. If this story spoke to you, if you've ever been betrayed, silenced, or overlooked, you are not alone. Subscribe now for more dark, emotional revenge stories that remind women like us how powerful we truly are.